In this video, you're going to get introduced to the different files we're going to be building later on to create the different functionalities behind our website. So let's start with adding a trip. So we've created so far the module, okay, responsible for creating a new trip. So the next step is to create an AJAX call inside our JavaScript file. So the call is going to be sent to a PHP file that we're going to call addtrips.php. So let's create that file. So this file is going to receive data from that form. It's going to process the data, and if everything is okay, it's going to add a new trip to our database or our table. So we're looking here as the car share trips table. Okay, so we come back to this table in a bit to understand its structure. Okay, all right, so the next thing we're going to need to have is the edit functionality. So if we click on the edit button inside any of the trips that we have created previously, then we'll be able to amend any of the details of that specific trip. All right, so we're going to have another AJAX call inside our JavaScript file, and that call is going to be sent to another file that we're going to call update trips.php. Okay, next we're going to have another call to make when we click on the delete button. All right, so again we're going to write some JavaScript code right there, and we're going to send an AJAX call to another file that we're going to call delete trip. Okay. All right. Now, when we load the page, the trips page, we want to see all these trips. All right. So the way this works is by sending another AJAX call. So when we load the page, we send an AJAX call to a file which will retrieve all the trips, okay, inside, or all the trips that specific user has created in the past. All right. So again, we're going to do that by sending an AJAX call to a file that we're going to call gettrips.php. Okay. So it's pretty simple. This file, all it's going to do is going to look for all trips belonging to that specific user by running a query. And if everything is okay, it's going to show the trips. If something happens, then it's going to show an error message. Okay. Now, the last thing to do is to go to the search page, okay, and build the search functionality. So the search functionality works the following way. So when I click on the search button, there will be an AJAX call. Okay, so that call is going to be sent to another PHP file, which I'm going to call search.php. So you're going to write the AJAX call inside the JavaScript file linked to the index.php file. Okay, and then the call is going to be sent to a new file we're going to call search.php. All right, now let's dive into a little bit more details. So let's start with creating a trip. So when we click on the Add Trips button, we're going to need to fill the form, and once we fill the form, we're going to need to send all the data that we see here. Usually we use the method serializeArray, okay, to get all the data from the form. But if you look at the structure of the car share trips table, you can see that we've got some extra details that we still need to send to the PHP file. Okay, so what we see here is the trip ID, okay, which is going to be auto incrementing. We see also the user ID, that's the user related to this trip, okay, or the user who created this trip. And then we're going to see details about the departure and destination. So the departure is whatever is right there. The destination is whatever is right there. But we'll see here something called departure coordinates and destination coordinates. So we're going to need to find these coordinates and send them to the PHP file, okay, even before processing any PHP data. So on the JavaScript side, we're going to need to look for these coordinates, the longitude and the latitude of the departure, as well as the longitude and the latitude of the destination. Okay. So to make things easier and avoid having to deal with one field containing both the longitude and the latitude of our departure, we can actually use two columns for this, okay, and just send each value to one of those columns. So what I can do right now is change this column, okay, into two columns. So let's add a new column right after departure. Okay, and call it departure longitude. So we're going to go for a varchar so the maximum is going to be, let's just have it as a float anyway, because the coordinates are, the longitude is a float anyway. So here we go. So let's save this and let's create another one. Departure latitude right after departure longitude. Okay, it's going to be a float as well. And let's do the same thing with the destination. And finally, destination latitude. All right. And now we can get rid of the departure coordinates column. Okay. And also the destination coordinates column. Okay, so once the form is submitted, what's going to happen, we're going to send all these values to the PHP file, and we're going to check if the trip is regular, and if everything is okay and we have no errors, then we're going to store values inside the different fields or the different columns of our table. So let's say that the trip is regular, okay, going every Monday, Tuesday at 9 o'clock, for example. So what's going to happen, we're going to go to all these fields. We're going to fill the departure longitude, latitude. So we're going to use a Google Geocoder to do this. I'm going to show you how to do all that. We're going to do the same thing for the destination. So we're going to get the longitude and latitude on the JavaScript side before sending it to the PHP file. We're going to store the price, the number of seats available, and here when we come to regular, we're going to store the value of regular. So if you remember, the value of that one was yes, and the value of that one was no. So if it's regular, then the value you're going to be storing inside the regular field is going to be yes. Okay, so you're going to have no date, and we're going to store the time there. Okay, that's the time. We're going to store it right there. And then we've got only Monday, Tuesday, and the value of each of these fields was 1. So, and since we've got that one checked and that one checked, then we're going to store 1 right there and 1 right there, and we're going to leave all the others blank. Okay, so that's how we're going to add a trip to the database. The edit function is going to be very similar. Okay, so basically the only thing that's going to change is the query, but everything else is going to run the same. We're going to get the coordinates of the departure and destination. Okay, and then we're going to store the new values, or just update the values based on the new values submitted by the user. Okay, now the question to ask is, how do we know which trip we're going to open if we click on any of these edit buttons? So if I click on that one, how do we know that we are talking about that trip when we click on that button? Okay, in other words, when I click on the edits, am I going to fill the details, okay, inside the form using that specific trip? Well, there are many ways of doing this. The easiest way is by storing something inside this button. So we can use a data attribute where we're going to store the ID of that specific trip. So when we retrieve the trips using the getTrips PHP file, we're going to store inside this edit button a data attribute referring to the ID of that trip. So when I click on that, I'm going to send an AJAX call to another file. Okay, and I'm going to be using JSON here. So we're going to retrieve details about the trip of ID, whatever is stored inside that button. Okay, so that's how we're going to do that. All right, so now we covered adding a trip, editing a trip. To delete a trip, we're going to use again that ID, okay, which is stored inside that button, to create a query which will just delete that trip from the table. All right. Okay, so that's regarding trips management. Okay. The next thing, or the final thing we're going to do, is the search algorithm. So the search algorithm is going to be a little bit more advanced than everything else. So the reason why is because we're going to need to find a way to look for trips not going from exactly to the departure to exactly the destination, but we're going to need to look for all trips going from anywhere within a 10 miles radius from Bedford, for example, our departure, to anywhere within a 10 miles radius from London. Okay, so if we were going just from Bedford to London and looking for exactly for trips going exactly from there to there, that would be a simple query to run. Now we're going to need to do something else. We're going to need to use the coordinates inside the database, okay, and look for all locations, okay, in the departure which are not far away or less than 10 miles away from the departure submitted by the user, and the same thing for the destination. Okay, so we're going to need to think about a proper algorithm to run, okay, and have some proper results. All right, so in the next video, we're going to start with the add trip functionality, and we're going to write the AJAX call, okay, get the coordinates of both the departure and destination, and then we're going to send all data to the PHP file, which is add_trips.php, okay, and then we're going to store the new details inside our table.